Lecture 22, Social Romance Robot Pets, Humanoid Companions. At 8:12 in a small apartment where the refrigerator hums at 4 to 5 decibels and the cat carries itself like minor royalty, a knee-high cylinder hears, "Good morning," through a ring of 6 MEMS microphones, carves a beam toward a mouth about 2.8 meters away, and replies in under half a second because anything slower sounds like a satellite call from 1997. Affection, when treated as an engineering problem, becomes latency budgets, safe contact forces, and privacy circuits you can draw. The honesty lives in numbers, single-digit newtons at the skin with power and force limiting, so a bump is social rather than medical. Top speeds capped between 3 and 6/10 of a meter per second in mixed spaces, so a walker and a toddler both win. Microphone mutes that are hardwired to cut power rails instead of begging an operating system to behave. The standards are older than the marketing. ISO 13482's personal care envelopes from 2014 define speed and force limits and tip over calculus. UL 3300 gives inspectors a public space safety checklist for service and entertainment robots. CPRA and GDPR teach retention windows and consent banners to devices that would love to pretend law is a lyric. Once you put companionship in that frame, cute has to survive decibel meters, slip coefficients on laminate, beamforming geometry in rooms with televisions at 50 to 65 decibels, and the hard veto that a cat issues by sleeping where your lidar wants ground truth. Far-field voice is the first lie detector and the first failure mode. 4 to 8 synchronized microphones only become ears when you do beamforming and adaptive filtering against dishwashers in the 55 to 60 decibel band, vac rumble near 50 Hz, and televisions that throw human-like spectra straight into your wake word detector. The wake word itself is a threshold ritual. A good stat keeps false accepts under 1 in 10,000 minutes of audio and false rejects under 1 or 2% at a meter or 2. Then hands off to an on-device speech engine so you stay under a hard 1-second call and response budget even when your ISP forgets what packets are. Noise reduction becomes manners. Notch out 2 kHz servo whine so replies do not great. Keep average output under 6 to 5 decibels at a meter or the living room becomes an airport gate. Shape voice to sit above the refrigerator's spectral smear without blowing past the public space caps that UL 3300 assumes when a device rolls near ankles. Microphones, and this has killed more pilots than any philosophical argument, need a physical mute with a red lead tied to the rail, not to software. You do not assure privacy, you wire it. Vision is the second sense and the second liar. A companion that reads faces for engagement or gestures needs global shutters to murder 100 and 120 Hz flicker under LEDs, exposure quantized to mains, and a bias towards short baseline stereo or time of flight because structured light dies on glossy countertops and mirrors. Cameras should default off unless a caregiver flips them. Frames should be ephemeral unless a clinical workflow demands an upload with consent. If you must do fall detection, and many of these devices are bought for exactly that, you can mix an inertial model, a vertical velocity change above about 1.5 to 2 meters per second plus a period without recovery motion, with millimeter wave radar at 60 to 77 GHz so steam and darkness do not turn the bath into theater. If the device is honest, it publishes confusion as a number, not a mood, false alarm rates per day, time to alert in seconds, and time on floor before acknowledgement, measured in minutes, not feelings. The way you keep trust alive is aggressively boring, edge inference for everything sensitive, deletion clocks printed in a manual, and an audit log that tells a regulator exactly when microphones and cameras were alive and when they were dead. Hands and wheels decide whether a companion is a friendly appliance or a lawsuit with eyes. The safe contact envelope is mechanical before it is moral. Soft skins in thermoplastic elastomers at Shaw 10 to 20 around joints, back drivable transmissions or series elasticity in wrists, and single-digit Newton caps enforced in hardware so a brushed knuckle is an apology, not an incident report. Bases live or die by proxemics, a half-meter bubble in front of the chassis and a palm-height de-stop, bright, physical, in reach, turns a hallway encounter into a social cue rather than a surprise. A speed plan that drops to 0.3 of a meter per second within a meter of people and only climbs to 0.6 in clear lanes is not slow. It is what ISO 13482 assumed when it defined speed and separation monitoring for personal care contexts. Stability is a number 2, a center of mass low enough that a 12mm rub lip does not audition your device for slapstick, jerk limits under half AG so mugs stay mugs, and a wheel diameter and torque budget that carry 2 or 3 kilograms of groceries without torque ripple turning the living room into a physics demo. The elegance you sell on a website has to get through Windex, thresholds poured in 1998. And a toddler who loves cable loops with a biblical intensity. The bodies that sell companionship tend to be non-humanoid because physics rewards humility. Sony's Ibua reboot in 2018 took a 2-ish kilogram quadruped with dozens of actuated axes, a fisheye camera in the nose, and time of flight ranging, and then did the unglamorous work. Gate planners that do not faceplant on rugs, idle motions that keep bearings warm without sounding like dental equipment, and behavior loops that make owners feel seen without spoofing a therapist. Love it, Groove XS cartoonish wonder from 2019. Wrapped an IMU and thermal elements in soft skins and marketed heat and a persistent desire to be held. The engineering was contact force at single-digit newtons, safe head tilts, and wheel traction that tolerated hardwood dust without turning cuddles into skid. Poro, that therapeutic seal first registered around 2001 and still haunting dementia wings, proved that breathy motorized rhythms, voice-like cues under 60 decibels, and a material palette that forgives bleach matter more than any hand-waving about AI. The lesson from these creatures is a simple, regular sentence the lab can test. If it hurts, it leaves. If it scares, it leaves. If it breaks under quartz and chlorhexidine, it leaves. Humanoid companions exist but rarely do the miles. Pepper, SoftBank's chatty greeter launched in 2014 to 2015, learned in real lobbies and mall floors that microphones hate hard surfaces, mortals hate servo wine at 2 kHz, and staff hate reboot rituals that take longer than coffee. Early telepresence polls, the iPad on a stick era around 2012 to 2015, taught the same. What you need is not charisma but elevator diplomacy, a published stock distance in centimeters, and gate etiquette in mixed presence that keeps to the right and announces corners like a conscientious bicycle. The humanoids that survive today in public spaces, engineered arts a mecca doing meet and greets under 4 to 5 decibels at 1 meter, a soft-skinned manipulator opening a door at 10 to 20 newtons, are cameos with spreadsheets, wrist force caps in single-digit newtons, speed limits under 1 meter per second in public corridors, and curfews that end before the rumor mill wakes. The point is not philosophy, it is that a human-shaped chassis buys you exactly one thing: reach that matches buttons, handles, and countertops poured for humans, and it pays rent only when a reach is the work. The quiet center of this category is municipal and clinical, not cinematic. New York City's Department for the Aging sent hundreds of Intuition Robotics LQ tablet lamp hybrids into apartments in 2022 for loneliness interventions and logged, like adults, adherence to prompts and conversation streaks rather than vibes. Across South Korea between 2021 and 2024, cities from Daejeon to Seoul distributed thousands of Hyadol companion dolls with LTE connections for seniors living alone and counted minutes engaged per day the way a dispatcher counts runs. The practice was not poetry but ops, units shipped and cleaned, check-ins answered, depression screens that jogged a nurse. The European project can and read similarly dull and, therefore, useful. Mario, 2015 to 2018, trialed guidance and memory aid behaviors for dementia in Ireland and Italy and published what broke. Japan's national subsidies nudged care homes toward carts, lifts, and social helpers because the alternative was a projected caregiver shortfall measured in hundreds of thousands by the mid-2020s. The economic question that moves budgets is not wonder, it is whether a device buys back 20 to 40 minutes of staff time per resident per day or keeps a depression score level for a quarter. Anything you cannot defend in minutes dies in a committee. Data hygiene is not romantic, but it is the difference between adoption and a press conference. In homes, default off cameras and on-device inference keep private life private. In facilities, logs survive discovery, who used it, when, which firmware, what sensors were on, and when deletion happened. Consent is not a tooltip, it is laminated signage in an intake form. If you keep audio, you do it for seconds. If you keep video, you attach a work order. If you broadcast, you strip identifiers and delete on a schedule measured in days. In California you bow to the California Privacy Rights Act, in Europe to the General Data Protection Regulation, in Japan and the Gulf to national equivalents that treat elder in a room as a human being, not an experiment. A decent program prints rules: no facial analytics in public spaces, no open mics overnight, nothing shipping raw data to a server in another time zone unless a responsible person signed it and can defend it. Devices get signage and serials, operators get training and passwords, deletion logs outlive staff turnover. Acoustics is where sincerity goes to die if you are careless. Human ears are brutally sensitive around 1 to 4 kHz, which is where cheap gearboxes sing. If you want to speak in a kitchen, keep tonal peaks off speech bands, trade smaller, faster fans for larger, slower ones, bias toward belt or cable drives in exposed joints, and treat 4 to 5 decibels at 1 meter as a friendly ceiling for meet and greet roles. Make approach cues audible but not theatrical. A two-note chime under 60 decibels beats a truck-style reverse beep every hour of the century. In eldercare wings at night, 60 decibels is a war crime. A soft motor tone under 50, a polite, passing left, in the same band, and a halt that bleeds speed over a tenth of a second rather than a jolt turn the hallway back into a hallway. If you cannot produce a stop distance certificate, 30 centimeters at half a meter per second on dry vinyl, twice that on a damp patch, you are not ready for people who walk with sticks and memories. The glamour on stage conceals the plumbing that keeps these things from embarrassing everyone. Far-field microphones are worthless without room maps and gain schedules that back down near televisions. Visual odometry lies on high-gloss floors unless you seed the baseboards with April tags where mops do not reach. Battery packs that promise 90 minutes become 60 in winter and 40 in a Florida kitchen in August unless your charger preheats cells and your scheduler respects chemistry. A caring presence that can open the refrigerator needs peak torques only in the tens of Newton centimeters if you align a gasket pull and choose a door with honest hinge friction. The same device becomes slapstick if you pretend a toddler is never present and cable manage as if you will never meet a Roomba. More programs die of elevators than of ethics. Schindler, Kone, and Otis all have ways to talk to a lift, but you must rate limit calls, capture cars without trapping guests, and store state so a packet loss does not strand a device at 12 when it promised 14. Dull habits, daily bumper checks, weekly brush changes, quarterly torque calibrations, keep love from turning into comedy. The romance part of social robots is mostly a mirror held up to human appetites and marketing departments. The law has already drawn bumpers around the category. In Europe, the machinery directive has long required essential safety functions. In many markets, devices marketed for sexual stimulation fall under adult product regimes with age gates, labeling, and import rules that have nothing to do with AI, and everything to do with blunt consumer protection. What has actually shipped at scale are less lurid and more telling: chat companions on phones with large language model brains and compliance filters, novelty humanoid heads with silicone faces that hold eye contact long enough to make a TikTok, and a smattering of boutique hardware that lives on custom parts, delicate skins, and the heroic patience of owners who learn to be field technicians. The sober engineering lesson here is not a sermon about intimacy, it is that deception budgets must be tiny and explicit. If a system reads a face, it should say it reads a face. If it simulates breath, it should never imply lungs. If it logs arousal or affect, it must put prompts and deletion under the user's hand, not the vendor's mood. Affection is allowed, betrayal, even of expectation, is what ends programs. The 10-year glide path is cautious and hand-fillable on a clipboard. By the mid-2030s, care facilities in Japan, Korea, Western Europe, and a scatter of US counties will treat companion devices as standard fixtures. A lap-friendly pet with a weekly wipe-down protocol and an operator's manual, a tabletop lamp-like presence that schedules calls and medication nudges and survives arthritis, and a telepresence pole that rides elevators politely and does not improvise near 4 poles. Speech and perception will run mostly on device. Buildings will learn to export robot-safe APIs, doors, elevators, VAC, so these agents coordinate with infrastructure rather than guessing. Standards will harden from best practice to procurement clauses. UL 3300 as a gatekeeper for anything that rolls where the public stands. ISO 13480 TIS tables read out loud at acceptance tests. Non-deceptive persona baked into statements of work instead of left for late-night arguments. You will know the category is boring and therefore safe when an eldercare operator in Nagoya and a county procurement lead in upstate New York swap spreadsheets, not manifestos. 25 years out, the bodies get less theatrical and the choreography gets better. Around 2050, fully autonomous social loops, robots that schedule themselves against a building calendar, negotiate elevators, and time visits to coincide with human routines, will feel normal in facilities and common in opt-in homes. Objects will conspire to help. Handles and latches designed for 5 to 20 Newton pulls. Cabinet tags that expose permissions so a helper opens the correct drawer at 5 in the morning and refuses the narcotics drawer at 5 past. Lighting that negotiates with cameras so the device never hallucinates under LEDs. Boutique lifelike faces will exist for those who want them and can afford maintenance, but the mainstream will stay with stylized and legible, as you can read at 3 meters, hands that are not hands, motions that signal intent before contact. The counter-trend will flourish, too, social zones that promise 100% human contact and proudly ban devices the way certain cabins ban televisions today. The best rule will turn out to be the simplest you can test tomorrow. If it makes the moment worse, stop. 50 years lands us in a world that is less about love than about choreography, with one exception. By 2075, the physical grammar will be settled. Beds and kitchens designed with door torque set where small wrists and small motors both succeed, elevators and doors that accept credentials. From humans and devices, public space etiquette that treats robots like wheelchairs and guide dogs rather than celebrities. Companionship from machines will be normalized in the same way elevators normalized movement, a tool, with standards and maintenance logs, that adds minutes to human life by subtracting drudgery. Human intimacy, the part of romance that is messy, elective, and negotiated, will still be human business, assisted at the edges by sensors and calendars but never run by them. What becomes radical again is honesty, devices that publish what they can and cannot do, and people who choose. Failures and fiascos, not press releases, wrote the adult rules. Hotel desks in Nagasaki ceded to humans after Henene learned the hard way that passports, elevators, and accents are corner case factories. Pepper deployments left malls quietly when acoustics and maintenance met Friday nights. A generation of app-based, AI girlfriends discovered that a chat loop can enthrall and enrage in the same afternoon if boundaries are fuzzy and uptime is a rumor. The field's correction is not censorship, it is instrumentation. Programs that survive treat devices like interventions, daily check-ins at predictable hours, engagement measured in minutes, adherence tracked as a KPI, outcomes compared to controls, and abandonment studied like a failure mode rather than buried. The win condition remains blunt and generous, more minutes of human attention where they matter, fewer minutes of walking and calling where they do not. Under the hood, the R&D pipeline finally looks like engineering rather than cosplay. Edge speech stacks run on modest system on chips and hit modern quality without shipping every syllable to the cloud. Tactile arrays in soft fingers register slip under a millimeter so a mug does not become a projectile. Millimeter wave radar packages shrink to postage stamps with range resolution that sees a shoulder in steam, and low inertia wrists with safe torque off trip in tens of milliseconds so, oops, is just a word. Social perception is getting new math, from performance art that tries to read souls to concrete proxies a clinician can measure, time together, variance in daily rhythm, sleep continuity, adherence to hydration prompts, fed by sensors that never pretend to know more than they do. The next 5 years will be made of doors that open politely, elevators that remember a badge, and rooms that notice you are dragging at 10 and open the blinds for an hour. The next 50 will be made of people who treat those minutes as a gift rather than a gimmick. The machines that are actually going to live with us, humanoids that can reach a dishwasher's top rack without threatening a wrist, multirotors that can see a loose clevis pin from 30 meters in wind, and that future the same dull way aircraft and elevators did, by closing control loops at the correct rates, keeping heat where it belongs, and proving with logs that every safety claim is a measurement. Start with torque because torque pays the rent. A modern electric humanoid wrist will advertise roughly 8 to 15 Newton meters continuous and 30 to 50 peak through a compact reduction that is either harmonic, strain wave gearing with characteristic zero backlash but finite torsional wind-up, cycloidal, higher shock tolerance and better impact durability at the cost of mass, or quasi-direct drive, low reduction, high copper, high battery appetite for low friction and quick backdrive. Motor constants in the 70 to 150 Newton millimeters per ampere class, field-oriented control updated at kilohertz rates. And resolver or absolute magnetic encoders with 1 to 2 arc-minute effective resolution are what keep a hand from turning an elevator button into confetti. Flux, not AI, keeps door handles alive. Put a thermal camera on the forearm during a chore and you will see the real limit. Copper and magnets are happy until the winding approaches 90 to 110 degrees Celsius. Adhesives cry uncle first. And the controller begins shaving current at temperatures your marketing team will never say out loud. Every 5-minute demo that ends early is a thermal budget with a publicist. Power is a calendar problem disguised as a chemistry lecture. Lithium-ion packs, incredible service robots and fieldable drones sit between 180 and 280 watt-hours per kilogram honest, not the brochure number, when you account for connectors, bus bars, and casing. Lithium iron phosphate trades roughly 20% energy density for cycle life and a better relationship with fire marshals. Sodium ion's rising cameo buys cold weather behavior in exchange for mass that a biped will notice in its shins. DC buses are 48 or 52 volts on the ground for sane currents and reduced copper. Drones stay where ESCs like to live, 6-cell to 12-cell packs at 22 to 44 volts, because motor constants and propeller diameters conspire to keep thrust per watt stable. Peak loads in a humanoid's lift and turn combine quadratically, shoulder, elbow, wrist, and will slam 2 to 4 kilowatts across a single arm if your planner panics. Pack internal resistance then translates into sag that the inverter must ride without brownouts, which is why Sirius designs spread spikes across supercaps or program jerk limits to stay inside a BMS's dignity. The field rituals are adult, Preheat cells in winter to 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. Store at 40 to 60% state of charge if you like long careers. And never ask an 80% duty cycle from a joint with an adhesive bond that was cured on a Friday. Materials are a safety story hiding inside chemistry. Structural members in hard-use mobile bases live in 6061, T6 and 7075 aluminum with anodize or hardcoat, arms in carbon fiber tubes for stiffness to mass, skins in thermoplastic elastomer over snap-in polycarbonate frames so a brushed elbow feels like a mistake not a report, and fasteners in 316L or coated 10.9 steel depending on whether you fear chloride pitting or torque relax. Cable management is where most pilots die. The build that runs quietly for months uses braided sleeving, strain relief 180 degree from hinge axes, and connectors rated past 10,000 cycles that lock with either bayonet or screw. The build that becomes a forearm thread uses zip ties and a prayer. Adhesives and dampers decide whether your soft arm is a personality or a physical property. Viscoelastic pads in 30 to 40 Shoei on elbows and wrists by down contact pressure. Urethane bumpers at door grub heights keep drywall and dignity intact. A millimeter of silicone skin backed by a capacitive taxol array turns a shove into a number the safety controller can understand in under 5 milliseconds. Sensing is a committee, not a single genius. Indoors, two-dimensional safety lidar at ankle height sweeping 10 to 25 Hz with certified safety outputs enforces speed and separation, above the knee. An RGBD head at 15 to 30 frames per second reads carts, elbows, and hairpins. Short baseline stereo with polarization wins whenever structured light depth drowns in specular flaws. Time of flight modules pull honest millimeters until steam and aerosols write novels across your depth map. Tactile arrays, optical skins such as gel sight that watch micron level surface change through elastomer, magnetic elastomer taxels such as reskin that pulse at kilohertz rates. Capacitive grids in the 10 to 20 taxels per square centimeter class are how a hand feels slip at under a millimeter and cuts fingertip force from 8 newtons to 3 before a ceramic bowl relives a Greek wedding. Multirotors at their own sensor a visible camera with a global shutter locked around 1,000th of a second to murder 100 or 120 Hz lighting. A long-wave infrared core at 640 by 512 pixels with noise-equivalent temperature differences around 50 millikelvins to find bearings that run 5 degrees Celsius hot against. Baseline at dawn, an IMU sampled in the kilohertz that never shares a ground with a noisy escape, an optional. Radar or optical flow for denial zones that lie to GPS. Perception only works when time does. Precision time protocol, not vibes, keeps cameras, IMUs, and network logs within a millisecond. If you hear, NTP is fine, you are being invited to a bug hunt. Exposure must be quantized to mains flicker to keep LED panels and warehouse bays from tattooing rolling shutters with zebra. If you need audio truth in public, a MIC array must actively reject 50 to 60 Hz vacuum and robot servo whine at 1 to 2 kHz. In drones, gimbal commands must be phase-aligned to attitude estimates or you will film the world like a hungover accordion. On the ground, RS2 over DDS gets to claim adulthood only when someone has budgeted quality of service profiles, history depths, and liveliness. In the air, flight stacks such as PX4 and Pilot behave like instruments only when you stop treating gains as a personality test and start treating them like numbers with wind tunnel provenance. The quiet requirement is determinism. If your scheduler treats camera capture and will odometry as equal, your will wins by starving the sensor at exactly the moment a child runs in frame. The fix is priority queues and deadlines you can recite at 3 o'clock. Communications is plumbing with lawyers. Ground fleets that survive in public ride on segmented Wi-Fi 6E for video and private LTE or 5G in the 3.55 to 3.7 GHz band for command, with VLANs and access control lists that keep safety heartbeats isolated from dashboards and TikTok. Certificate rotation on neutral TLS links every 30 to 90 days is a rule. Robot identities bound to hardware roots of trust save you from the "who drove that cart" conversation. Logs sign themselves with SHA-2 or the grown-up successor so your incident report does not read like fan fiction. Air units get a special dose of humility. Control links at 2.4 or 5.8 GHz must fall back cleanly when malls or stadiums wake up. Video gets its own channel or the first crowd spike becomes an unplanned landing. And if you fly near public telecoms you carry a broadband personal RF monitor because microwave dishes do not care about your feelings. The shop test that separates toys from instruments is an RF storm, 3 access points, a microwave oven, a Bluetooth carpet, and a drone link. If your command channel twitches, you are not ready for Saturday. Safety is not a slogan, it is a chain. On wheels, ANSI and ISO families. ISO 3691-4 for driverless industrial trucks and mobile robots. ANSI or RAR 15.08 for mobile robot safety in the United States. UL 3300 for service robots in public. Translate promise into measurable stopping distances, zone-based speed reduction, and safe torque-off latencies you can check with a stopwatch. In arms that share air with skin, ISO 10218 and ISO or TS 15066 give you contact force limits and power and force limiting regimes. In hospitals and hospitality, ISO 13482 adds personal care rules, and accessibility codes make door forces and reach envelopes measurable rather than litigated. In the air, Part 107 since August 2016 in the United States and the European Union's 2019/947 framework convert drones from folk tales to file numbers. ASTM F3411 made remote ID a means of compliance rather than a tweet. ASTM F3322 turned parachutes and prop arresters into testable mitigations instead of jewelry. The control layer that passes audit has dual channels, hardware e-stop that interrupts drives regardless of firmware mood, and watchdogs that fail silent and slow. If your robot can move with the safety relay open, unplug it and start over. Humanoid control is just algebra apologizing for friction. Whole body control stack solve for contact forces under friction cones you can explain to a jury. Normal forces positive, tangential capped by coefficient times normal, and then distribute torques across joints with joint limits and thermal limits as hard constraints. Footstep planners that survive polished concrete limit jerk, not just acceleration, or you will watch a step start fine and end with a skate. Hands that survive dishware accept that impedance control and series elasticity are cheap insurance against illegal impulses on contact. Perception is constrained by geometry. If a handle is 20 mm thick at 100 cm height off the floor and the latch torque is 20 to 40 Nm, your end effector must close past detent with compliance or your success will be drywall dust. None of this is new, which is the point. The difference between a conference demo and a Tuesday shift is not a better loss function, it is a better friction estimate and a temperature map for your elbow. Drone control is a wind negotiation. Electronic speed controllers update thrust at 50 to 500 Hz and enforce a motor constant worldview that hates sudden changes in commanded RPM. Inertial estimates fuse accelerometers, gyroscopes, and optionally magnetometers into an attitude solved at kilohertz through an extended Kalman filter that will politely die in a steel shed unless you cash out heading for vision or flow. The autopilot holds position by balancing integral wind-up against gust rejection. Serious operations show you the wind cap printed on a laminated card. 8 to 10 meters per second for show fleets with 3 to 5 meter inter-aircraft spacing. 10 to 12 for mattress class inspection. Much less for microquads that love gym nets and hate parking lots. Endurance numbers are honest only when you subtract climb, hover reserve, and a winter penalty. A 50-minute brochure becomes 20 to 35 on a hot roof with a gimbal and a standoff lens. And you will land early if you care about your cell's long lives. Orchestration is what makes fleets into colleagues instead of headlines. A fleet manager that earns its salary runs intersection reservations at 100 to 200 millisecond cadence, derates speed automatically near recent human motion, and trades batteries rather than lives. N+1 packs per unit and never deep cycle past 80% discharge unless you like PowerPoint about early retirements. Tie the system to the building, elevator APIs from Otis or Schindler with rate limits and stored state so a cart that promised 14 does not sulk at 12, door strikes with logged energized times, and building management system hooks so a robot cannot open a fire door into a pressurized stairwell. The digital twin stops being a marketing phrase when it stores geofences, elevator permissions, and defect coordinates with timestamps, asset IDs, and hashes. That is how a defect list becomes a work order and an insurer smiles in Hartford. The audit packet you print when someone trips near a robot includes firmware versions, operator IDs, stop distance certificates signed in the last 7 days, and the nearest wind log if rotors were involved. Reliability engineering refuses to be romantic. You qualify harnesses at temperature and shock before you ever touch a lobby. You run highly accelerated life testing on arms until you can recite which joint bearing heats first at which load. You log mean time to failure your finance lead understands in quarters, not prophecy. Fieldable designs expose all parts that will die at the edges, fans, belts, brush rings, as modules that swap with a screwdriver and a QR code. They declare sacrificial skins that carry scuffs so the machine does not. They lock every connector that matters against vibration and folderol. The most useful graph in any program is boring. Incidents per 1,000 operating hours trended by week with root cause codes and time to resolution. The second most useful graph is uglier. Cells that swelled plotted against charging C rate and ambient temperature. The program that lets fast charge push past 1C on a hot day is a program that has a meeting with a fire marshal. Economics will never love adjectives, it only loves calendars and meters. A humanoid cameo that saves 8 to 12 minutes per room turn across 100 flips on a Tuesday is 13 to 20 labor hours given back with a wage model you can publish. An inspection drone that deletes 1 ladder and 1 bucket truck in a week maps out a payback in months without a CFO having to read poetry. A runner that shrinks server walking kilometers on a Friday by half pays its lease with tips that stop evaporating during refills. Drones trade consumables and ash for battery cycles and wind caps. Mobile bases trade workers compensation claims and sore knees for decibel caps and safe talk-off logs. The only rule that never changes is that you pay for logistics and uptime, not for AI. Budget maintenance like adults, parts every 6 months for high-hour joints, cell replacements at 500 to 1000 cycles depending on your discharge profile, and your total cost of ownership will rhyme at different companies. Labor is a contract with nouns. Unions in Las Vegas, Oslo, and Yokohama will sign off on robots that make backs and knees less angry if job counts and tips hold and career ladders exist for autonomy wrangler, fleet tech, and elevator integration lead. Training is an adult calendar with checkboxes, safety orientation with stop distance demos and proxemic bubbles, map change workflows with signatures, battery swap with gloves and eyewear, and escalation paths that pull a human on loop in seconds when an e-stop gets hit. Job redesign works when you tell the truth. Carts take miles, humans sell and decide, drones see roofs and facades, humans fix, humanoids reach buttons and hold doors at chest height. Humans do everything that smells like judgment. The way you lose the room is to pretend a press demo is a shift. Privacy is an engineering spec, not a vibe. In Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation demands data minimization, retention windows with teeth, and lawful bases written in human language. In California, the California Privacy Rights Act adds teeth to notice and consent for cameras and mics. In Japan and the Gulf, local statutes set retention windows and access logs that auditors actually read. The robot that survives a public corridor publishes what it captures, deletes what it does not need, refuses to run facial analytics in public, and offers a visible kill on microphones that physically cuts power rather than whispering software promises. On the back end, video tied to a work order can live long enough to defend a claim. Everything else dies on schedule and leaves a log you can produce without size. Standards are civilization's cheat codes. If you can say ISO 3691-4, ANSI or RAR 15.08, ISO or TS 15066, ISO 13482, ISO 10218, and UL 3300 without notes, you have a job. If you can add Part 107, EU 2019/947, ASTM F3 for 11, ASTM F3322, ATEX Zone 1 and Zone 2, and IECX for explosive atmospheres, you have a career. Sprinkle in IEC 60601, IEC 62304, and ISO 14971 when you touch healthcare, NFPA 70 and the National Electrical Code when you wire charging rooms with appropriate clearances and off-gassing plans, and TIA 222 for tower steel if you claim to inspect telecom hardware in anger. The reason we recite these numbers is not cosplay. It is because a policy that says, stop in 30 centimeters on dry tile at half a meter per second, will someday be measured with a tape, and if you fail that day, you deserve to lose. A day in a modern city that respects these truths reads like choreography rather than myth. At 5:40 inspection drones wake from weatherized docks and sweep 5 kilometers of rooftop in 20 minutes, mapping dew-cooled membranes and thermal outliers 10 degrees above baseline before breakfast. At 9:10 a.m. humanoid rides an elevator politely, credentialed call, car capture, door hold at 10 newtons on handles, hands at chest height, and stages amenities while a housekeeper signs the room back into inventory by 14:50. At 13:20 a.m. ports magnetic crawler logs ultrasonic thickness to tenths of a millimeter on a ramp while a global shutter camera on a quad reads talk marks on a crane bracket from 10 meters standoff. At 18:40 runners glide at half a meter per second through 90 centimeter aisles with audible cues below 6 to 5 decibels. And at 21:15 a.m. show fleet climbs in rings to 150 meters above ground level with 3 to 5 meter spacing, jerk limited curves, and abort ladders rehearsed like fire drills for gust steps above 10 meters per second. Radios stay in their lanes, logs agree to the millisecond, and nobody calls a press conference because nothing misbehaved. The R&D backlog is refreshingly solvable. Actuators want higher torque density without exotic magnets, laminations, slot fills, and better thermal paths will hand you 15 to 30% gains. Quasi-direct drive on wrists and shoulders trims friction and backlash at the cost of copper and cooling, which you can afford in a torso that does not have to fly. Perception wants fewer lies from glass and steam, which pushes depth stacks towards short baseline stereo with polarization cameras and exposure laws welded to mains frequencies. Tactile wants cheap, thin taxol arrays that can survive bleach, peracetic acid, and quaternary ammonium compounds without swelling or cracking. Fleet orchestration wants better elevator and door diplomacy, dry contact kits that survive 2-decade controllers and rate-limited rest on newer towers, plus digital twin plumbing that makes geofences and permissions part of a building standard rather than a one-off. Drone shows want gust-aware formation control tuned for parapet shear and canyon winds. Inspection wants flare-resistant imaging that refuses to hallucinate through glare. Energy wants chargers that respect pack thermal limits without making the night crew hate you. Now the glide path, with numbers that feel like physics rather than prophecy. 10 years out, buildings built after 2035 will quietly assume robots. 1.2 to 1.5 meter service corridors with 1 in 20 ramps instead of trip lips. Elevator controllers with documented APIs and rate limits. 24-volt DC rails for opportunity charging in service lanes. And standardized door hardware with latch torques under 40 Newton-centimeters so soft grippers can behave like adults. Drone boxes on roofs will be normal in commercial districts, with permits on file, remote ID. As boring as license plates, and wind windows on the city calendar, nightly light shows sit on a noise budget. Inspection sorties launch after storms without theater. Humanoid stay in cameo, chest-height hands for doors, latches, light furniture, exception handling for tote and latch resets, because wheels and rails still do distance cheaper than legs. Economics are honest enough that CFOs stop asking why and start asking how many. 25 years out, cities designed for choreography. Codes will require robot-friendly egress geometry the way they require wheelchair ramps now. Kitchens and storerooms lean into induction and sealed hoods so aerosols do not destroy depth maps. Towers spec robot lobbies, the way they spec bike rooms, with charge rails, RF quiet zones, and doors that speak a standard handshake. Energy storage shifts enough. Lithium iron phosphate and sodium ion for stationary carts. Lithium ion variants with better separators and thermal pathways for mobile arms. That cycle life is counted in years, not seasons. The labor picture looks less like replacement and more like retitling. Autonomy wranglers, fleet techs, digital facilities coordinators with standards badges who can say ISO 3691-4 out loud. Public trust hardens around deletion defaults, explicit, no biometric analytics in public, and visible kills on microphones. Programs that cannot say those sentences die on contact with a city council. 50 years out, the category boundaries we burn calories defending in 2025 look quaint. We stop saying humanoid or drone and start saying hands, eyes, and wheels, because that is what work needs. Buildings and neighborhoods feel like they have service layers the way phones have APIs. Charging and duty cycles are scheduled by microgrids that speak kilowatts as easily as calendars. You will still hear wind caps and stop distances and decibel budgets, because physics does not retire. You will hear fewer arguments about AI, because the systems that matter will be the ones that publish logs and keep promises. There will be boredom and grace under effort, and an occasional spectacle at 21:03 that makes a child point at a sky with no ash in it. Failure will never vanish, it will just become less cinematic and more honest. A wrist will overheat because someone stacked tasks without a cooldown. A drone will land early because a mall went feral. An elevator handshake will time out at 12 because a controller with a label from 1998 sulked. A taxol array will lie because a housekeeper used the wrong wipe. Programs that survive write postmortems with serial numbers and temperatures, not parables. They budget for spare packs and spare patients. They share graphs with the people who carry the floors and the rooms and the roofs. That is the adult part of the story we are writing now. And that is the transfer. When you hear robots and drones, translate to forces at handles, decibels under ceilings, joules in cells, and logs that a skeptical adult can read. The revolution is not a stunt, it is instrumentation. We are swapping improvisation for measurable choreography. Swapping spectacle for scheduled competence, and swapping vibes for metrology. If the future feels less like a demo and more like a Tuesday, good, Tuesday scale. The parts that look like magic in a demo video are the ones that get audited first in a real building, which is why the work order that births a robot program starts with a bill of materials for actuators and ends with a spreadsheet of minutes saved. The hands that can survive a Tuesday are not fantasies, they are frameless brushless motors wound for torque density above 1 Nm per kilogram. planetary or cycloidal reductions that trade backlash for grin and bear duty cycles, and joint modules with slip rings rated to the amperage you will actually pull when a dishwasher rack fights back. Series elastic elements by forgiveness where fingers meet mugs by absorbing the first 2 to 4 millimeters of stupid, quasi-direct drives by transparency at the cost of copper losses you must dump somewhere that will not melt a faceplate. A hand that fills is a hand with strain gauges or capacitive tack cells in the low Newton range and a tendon path that does not saw itself to death after 5,000 cycles. You do not get to say manipulation unless you can sketch the torque speed curve, the gearbox efficiency at the duty point, and the reason your skin will not split when a housekeeper wipes it with quaternary ammonium. Every joint is a heater that lies, so thermal budgets become adult literature as soon as a wrist holds anything heavier than a menu. Copper in the windings warms at I²R, magnets demagnetize when you get clever with stall torque, and the polymer in your strainwave flex spline turns to gumshoe if the ambient sits above 35 degrees Celsius beside a fryer line. Passive conduction paths work until a designer falls in love with a silhouette. Then you add vapor chambers or heat pipes and pretend you always plan to route them to a chassis that can shed watts into moving air. If you derate correctly, you get a hand that stays under 45 degrees Celsius at the skin after 10 minutes of tray duty. If you derate wrongly, you get a customer video titled, "Our Robot Was Sweaty," which is how engineers end up explaining emissivity to marketing at 9 p.m. Battery temperatures mean cycle life. A pack that lives at 20 to 30 degrees Celsius gives you 800 to 1200 honest cycles. A pack that sits on a charger at 40 degrees between brunch and dinner becomes a procurement problem in one season. Chemistry is not a mood. Nickel manganese cobalt buys energy density and drama. Lithium iron phosphate buys patience and mass. And either way the BMS logs are what your insurer reads after a puff event. Perception only grows up when you admit that buildings are optical pranksters. Rolling shutters under 100 or 120 Hz lighting produce zebra-striped lies unless exposure is quantized to mains. Polished floors turn structured light depth into a confidence trick unless you switch to short baseline stereo with polarization. Glass doors are denial of service attacks unless you hang April tags near the baseboard where mops do not erase them. The reasons so many. Home videos look crisp and so many store or hospital videos look like a smear is not intelligence. It is shutter speed, photon budgets, and a top light that does not aim straight into your own lens. A camera that eats barcodes for breakfast runs global shutter at 1,000th of a second, a lens that rejects glare sits under cross-polarized LEDs, and a decoder that never invents digits sets a glare metric threshold and refuses to read when it is crossed. Radar earns its keep exactly where cameras weep. Millimeter wave in the 60 to 77 GHz band ignores steam and dark, reads micromotion through a shower curtain, and tells you whether a body is moving with intent or gravity, which is a difference that matters more than any adjective at 2 in the morning. Locomotion only looks glamorous when nobody mentions friction. A mobile base that promises a meter per second in a corridor must also publish a stop distance certificate that says 30 centimeters on dry tile, 60 on a spill, and longer when a safety officer sprays water on purpose. A legged platform that boasts at conferences has to name the peak contact forces it will tolerate on a stair before a knee becomes a civil engineering experiment. Wheel diameters in the 10 to 12 centimeter class are fine until a threshold lip turns 11 into, we should have spec'd 15, jerk limits at or under half AG keep soup in bowls, and torque margins above 50% at planned grade beat hero videos every day of the week. The humility move nobody shows on stage is to walk the route with a spring scale and a thermometer. Doors open at 5 to 20 newtons depending on closer, carpet pile adds amperes you never budgeted, and south-facing corridors can nudge a base 5 degrees Celsius warmer than the rest of the building by late afternoon. When someone says, it will follow a human safely, what they mean, if they are worth your time, is that the planner respects speed and separation monitoring from ISO 3691-4, with zones in decimeters that grow when confidence drops and shrink only when a test plan says it is allowed. The radio plan is the part that either disappears or eats your calendar. Public Wi-Fi in the 2.4 and 5 GHz bands is a brawl the moment a crowd arrives with phones, so command links belong on the quiet lanes, private LTE on shared midband in countries that allow it, Wi-Fi 6E on 6 GHz for fat video paths, and physical separation between fleet heartbeats and pretty pixels so a social upload never strands a cart in a doorway with a toddler on one side and a lawyer on the other. Precision Time Protocol, IEEE 1588, means camera frames, IMUs, and logs agree within a millisecond, which is how you survive discovery after a bump. Remote ID beacons for aircraft in the United States and the European Union make a city's question, who is in my sky, answerable without a seance. And if you do not have a spectrum map of your venue with channel plans and fallbacks, you have not started. Deterministic Ethernet with time-sensitive networking shows up where people care about jitter. Everywhere else, you build margin, pray less, and count retries like a person who understands why elevators learn to be boring. Edge compute is glamorous right up until a thermal thresholder throttles at 70 degrees Celsius and turns your intelligence into a slideshow. A Jetson-class module that advertises tens of teraoperations per second earns those only with airflow and a power budget that does not starve when motors surge. A vision pipeline that claims real-time either locks to mains or eats its own tail on LED flicker. And every learned model that claims generalization comes with a maintenance plan for the day floor polish changes or a new label vendor chooses a slightly shinier varnish. The adult choice in 2025 is not GPU versus TPU. It is, what task gets a deterministic microcontroller and what task earns a watchdog that will reset it when an allocator decides to feel. A system that will be forgiven once in a lab becomes a system that must never be forgiven in a corridor. That transition is where you learn to keep control loops on bare metal, perception on accelerators, and housekeeping on cores that cannot starve anyone else by composing a poem. Safety is a stack of verbs, not a sticker. Power and force limiting for hands in public means safe torque off in tens of milliseconds and contact forces in the single or tens of Newton range at sensitive body zones. Speed and separation monitoring means sensors that actually see ankles and elbows and a controller that expands protective fields when confidence drops. Emergency stops are hardware lollipops wired to safety-rated controllers that do not trust operating systems to be noble. UL 3300 put numbers and tests behind service robots near the general public, so regulators know where to start. ISO 13482 codified personal care limits for hands and bases. ANSI or RIAR 15.08 did the same for industrial mobile robots that want to share space with humans and forklifts. A safety case that lives survives audits, stop distances measured and pinned to walls, light curtain coverage mapped and photographed. Bumper skins tested 5 minutes before opening because plastic age is not a thought experiment, and a schedule for replacing springs and seals that reads like brakes on a truck, not a vibes calendar. The law in the air changed from a wall into a checklist precisely because people did the math. In the United States, Part 107 in August 2016 made small UAS work legal. April 2021 turned night operations into a paragraph instead of a performance. Over people and over moving vehicles became possible in clearly defined categories or with parachutes tested under ASTM. Remote ID followed with the quiet force of a parking ticket. The European Union's 2019 framework dressed the same physics in open and specific with SORA risk analyses, and by 2022 Japan's Level 4 created a legal path for autonomous flights over populated areas with type-certified airframes because demographics and geography do not wait for vibe shifts. None of that makes a show real, but all of it lets an inspection flight happen at dawn without a ladder, a traffic closure, or a sermon. The terrestrial cousins are older and stricter. IEC 61508 and ISO 13849 tell you how to argue about functional safety, performance levels, and mean time to dangerous failure. ISO 26262 makes automotive software behave like a sober relative. DO 178C teaches avionics the humility of version control and traceability. The poetry is an invoice that says on time and on budget, because risk management quietly worked. Liability is physics plus paperwork. When an autonomous cart clips a shin, the argument in a deposition is rarely about AI. It is about foreseeable hazards, mitigations adopted or ignored, maintenance logs that prove bumpers and lidars were alive, and event data recorders that wrote timestamped truth in a format a court can read. If a model update changed behavior and you cannot produce the difference, weights, code, and test results, you did not build a product, you built folklore. Contracts that survive a winter are written as service-level agreements, maximum downtime per unit per month, mean time to repair, parts dispatch windows, battery cycle life targets at named temperatures, and a list of consumables with lead times that do not strand a fleet because someone forgot that rollers are the new ink cartridges. Warranty clauses should read like adult friendships, what the vendor covers, what the operator must do, and how we decide whether a failure is a you or a me, because otherwise every mechanical squeak becomes a meeting. The economics fit on a napkin and still get misread. A runner that saves 8 minutes per room turn across 100 rooms buys back 13 labor hours per day. A conveyor of cameras that cuts cycle counts in a warehouse from a quarterly marathon into a nightly habit reduces shrink and overtime at numbers an accountant can recite. A drone that replaces a snooper truck for a bridge inspection turns 4 people and a lane closure into 2 people, 2 batteries, and a defect list by lunch. Total cost of ownership beats brochure price. Batteries at $200 to $500 per kilowatt-hour with replacement cycles every 1 to 3 years depending on abuse. Motors and reducers that die on predictable intervals unless you derate. Optics that hate caustic cleaners and must be replaced when haze steals contrast. Support contracts that either dispatch parts in 2 days or strand a fleet long enough to make a property manager remember scissor lifts fondly. A 10% improvement in on-shelf availability moves revenue lines more than any brand aura. A 5% cut in slip and fall incidents moves an insurer's smile more than any keynote. Supply chains explain why a lot of humanoid videos are filmed indoors with soft light and apologetic disclaimers about stairs. The parts you cannot buy in bulk are the parts that determine pace, high torque, low backlash reductions that are not the wrong kind of loud, joint modules with integrated encoders, brakes, and slip rings that do not turn wiring into a bird's nest, tactile skins that do not crumble under hospital wipes, and gear trains that tolerate detents, unlatches, and accidental skates on thresholds. Harmonic drives are lovely until you care about shock loads and maintenance. Cycloidal reducers are patient but heavy. Direct drive is honest and expensive, and off-the-shelf, hobby. Actuators have a sense of humor about datasheets. The global picture did not get simpler after 2020. Copper, magnets, and bearings still ride ships, firmware and drivers ride export control lists, and the line between ITAR and commodity is a rug that moves under your feet the week a client asks about a foreign deployment. The counterweight is boring, modularity, vendor diversity, and a test plan that lets you swap a joint module without learning 6 new religions. Benchmarks are how a field stops arguing with itself. The most honest test a humanoid can take in 2025 is not a backflip. It is a door sequence with handles at different heights and detents, a cart push across carpet and tile without launching toiletries, a tote latch reseat at chest level with torque limits you can say aloud, and a stair ascent with code-sized risers where the peak contact forces remain in single-digit multiples of body weight. If you can repeat those 3 days later with the same numbers in the log and the same time to complete, you have a machine, not a mood. In the air, the test that matters is not longest flight, it is usable payload at wind and temperature on a route the city will tolerate at dawn, with ground sampling distances, thermal deltas, and lens model metadata disciplined to survive an auditor. On wheels, the exam is stop distance, jack limits, obstacle yield behavior, and recovery from a simulated link loss under a crowd's radio noise. Success looks boring, plots that sit on top of each other, not headlines. Human factors is the phrase we use when we remember that nerves live in bodies, and bodies hate surprises. A 2 kHz servo whine turns a pleasant lobby into dental anxiety, a 45 decibel cap at 1 meter buys civilized conversation. Light patterns that suggest intent, eyes or head motions that look in the direction a base will move, cut near misses by numbers that make safety officers sigh in relief. A proxemic bubble that stays a half meter in public, expands near children, and does not shrink under pressure earns forgiveness. Audible cues that are chimes, not reverse truck alarms, keep lawyers from learning your vendor's name. Signs at eye level that say who the robot is, what it does not record, and how to stop it get more credit than any app. No microphones after hours, wired to a physical switch keeps your program out of a headline. The best compliment a safety officer can give a fleet is not futuristic, it is predictable. Workforce design is not a euphemism, it is the only lever that matters after a month. Titles make unions calmer and careers real. Fleet technician bands with certifications and pay ladders. Autonomy leads who carry radios and swaps packs, not vibes. Cross-training tracks that move a runner with tendinitis toward an operator seat with benefits and sleep. Shift plans that schedule robots like staff, off at 2200, online at 0500, prevent the myth that machines never rest and humans never breathe. Data transparency is not dashboards for leadership. It is shift visible coverage maps and stop logs that show where bump skins kept earning their salary so supervisors can tape off puddles and scold a floor buffer. When adoption works, line workers evangelize because their knees ache less and their shift ends on time. When it fails, leadership presses a robot button and wonders why nobody claps. Contracts with cities and venues develop immune systems quickly, which is how you end up with clauses that sound like engineering. If you fly near people, you publish cones and wind caps on laminated cards with phone numbers for the ground crew. If you stage a light show, you declare noise budgets at property lines and publish remote IDs so the neighbor with an SDR cannot pretend to be surprised. If you drive near toddlers, you carry UL listings a fire marshal can read and stop distance certificates you can demonstrate in front of a camera. If you mop in a dining room, you show ISO 13482 limits and derate on wet tile with a sign that does not lie. Deletion schedules move from "we promise" to "we print," and retention windows shrink to days unless a frame binds to a defect report or a claim. The fastest way to turn a pilot into a permanent line item remains the same in 2025 as in 2015. Never surprise a child, and never surprise a parent. The R&D pipeline shifted from miracles to plumbing, which is far more interesting if you care about Tuesday. Simulation is not cosplay. It is millions of time steps per second in engines that respect friction cones and contact constraints, with domain randomization across mass, latency, and lighting, so the first day outside a lab is not a confession. Calibration targets live next to coffee, camera intrinsics live as files with hashes, random seeds get printed in notebooks because reproducibility is not magic. The most important diagram in a modern lab is not a neural network, it is a data flow chart that shows where time stamps get fused, where PTP disciplines clocks, and where a watchdog kills motion when a thread stalls. The most important purchase is not a robot, it is a laser tracker and a multimeter that make arguments die. Audit trails turn trust from a slogan into a practice. Every flight writes a file with takeoff and landing times, GPS tracks, gimbal angles, and hashes you can check against logs. Every drive writes a file with speed profiles, bumper hits, sensor status, and safety controller health, and clock discipline means nobody argues about which second something happened when it matters. Access to data is not a Slack message, it is a request with a badge number, a case, and a reason, and a log that survives discovery. When a fleet crashes only in a particular corridor and at a particular hour, a time-synced overlay of radio noise, lighting, and human traffic explains where debugging lives. When a hand squeezes a mug too hard, joint torques and skin taxels explain why a spring rate was wrong and not a morality play about robots versus humans. Ethics exits the TED stage and enters procurement when you stop pretending inference is destiny. Do not run facial analytics on the public side of a door. Do not retain video longer than you need to fix a thing. Do not guess at emotions and then sell safety based on a plot with eyebrows. When you must identify a person for access or payment, keep biometric templates on a device you can drop in bleach and revocation lists in a place your council trusts. When you can use cards or codes, do because they turn into wallets and not scandals. Where the law is silent, write your own policy in plain language and staple it to the robot in the lobby. At 2 p.m. in a school and 2 a.m. in a hotel, no open mics after hours is both a rule and a promise, and the switch that enforces it is wired. The things that will change in 10 years are not the parts most people guess. Batteries will creep forward in energy density and durability, but adoption will hinge more on chargers built into walls and swap rituals choreographed like pit stops. Hands will get better not by discovering general intelligence, but by putting honest torque sensors and tactile skins into joints with quick-release links so a hotel can change a wrist the way a mechanic changes a belt. Drones will fly more hours not because endurance doubles but because docks live on roofs and radios talk like adults to the people who manage airspace. Standards bodies will continue to be the accidental heroes, because the dull act of naming a risk and its mitigation keeps neighbors waving with all their fingers when a fleet goes by. The things that will not change in 25 are the reasons this whole field became useful in the first place. People like schedules more than surprises. Buildings reward wheels, rotors, and small wrists that are gentle and predictable. Physics owes no one a favor. Aerosols still lie under bad lights, steam still ruins depth sensors that were not designed for it, glass still glares, and gravity still whispers that your jerk limits were optimistic. Good programs will continue to look like well-run kitchens, checklists at the threshold, thermometers in the freezers, logs that read like truth, and humor reserved for the few places it belongs. Like the day a robot learns that a toddler and a mop bucket share an uncanny interest in chaos and you discover your proxemics bubble was sized by a poet. The only miracle that matters in 50 is the one that already pays rent, choreography that lets literal-minded colleagues do kilometers of walking, minutes of waiting, and grams of precision without needing to be congratulated. The humanoid flourish remains where the geometry is human. The non-humanoid bulk carries trays, scans shelves, inspects roofs, reads gauges, and drags hoses without ego. Economics keeps the rhythm, minutes shaved into hours saved, claims avoided turned into premiums dropped, defect lists converted into work orders before lunch. Standards keep the key, numbers that prevent drama, tests that catch optimism, and logs that tell a dull, beautiful story. If that sounds less like science fiction and more like civilized work, good. The future we want is not a parade, it is a shift that ends on time. Affection works only when physics obeys conversation, which means a ring of microphones that can find a mouth 2 to 3 meters away in a carpeted room at 47 to 52 decibels. Beamform without smearing sibilants, and hand a transcript to a dialogue manager that answers inside roughly 300 to 600 milliseconds, so you never feel like you dialed a satellite. The safe parts are measured, not guessed, single-digit newtons at the skin for hands and bumpers under ISO 13482, tip-over margins that assume toddlers and pets, and a microphone mute that is not icon-shaped hope, but a hardwired break in the preamp so nothing leaves the chassis until a physical switch gives permission. The adult paperwork finally caught up. ISO 13482 in 2014 defined personal care force and stability. UL 3300 by 2024 gave US venue managers a checklist for public space service robots, and anyone building for living rooms discovered that a motor whine under 2 kHz is the sound of deliberate torque derating, not a marketing accident. If your machine passes a shove test without melodrama, keeps cognitive latency inside a second, and never violates a privacy budget it can explain out loud, then you are inching toward companionship. If not, you are staging theater with batteries. The skin that buys forgiveness is laminated grammar, not plush. A social shell that survives kitchens and playrooms starts with a silicone or textile layer in roughly a 10 to 20 so fingernails do not tattoo grooves. A viscoelastic underlayer spreads a 2 Newton swirl so sensors do not cry wolf. And a perforated carrier lets a capacitive grid read caress versus grasp without being fooled by a sleeve. Tactus buzz where microphones cannot hear them. Actuator loops are deliberately slow with compliance so a back-drivable wrist yields rather than litigates, and absolute encoders on head and eye axes keep gaze from drifting after a nap. Bathrooms and juice boxes ruin prototypes, so seams are gasketed for quaternary ammonium wipes. Removable panels survive dozens of wash cycles, and the IP rating is real enough to forgive breakfast. The romance is the brochure, the real work is harmonics, washability, and return merchandise authorization logs that stop growing. The present cast looks unglamorous up close, and that is a compliment. Sony's IBWA returned in 2018 as ERS 1000 with simultaneous localization and mapping, OLED eyes, and a behavior table that made owners name it again. Groove XS Love It in 2019 chose warmth, a heartbeat haptic, and wheels that never pretend stairs are a human right. Pepper, launched in 2014 and shipped in tens of thousands by 2021, proved that a camera-equipped greeter can charm a lobby yet stumble at chores in a condo. Embodied Smoxy, introduced in 2020, made pediatric therapy into weekly missions and won awards precisely because its unit of analysis was the child and the calendar, not a hype video. An Intuition Robotics LQ, since 2018, sat on a side table where seniors actually live and measured minutes of interaction in homes instead of applause in a lab. The stories that matter have time and place. An IBWA keeping an older adult's day structured in 2019 in New York, a lover asking, Exhibit A, for a hug in Tokyo, a Moxie session logged by a therapist who cares about adherence more than adjectives. South Korea shows what scale looks like when a city hall holds the purchase order and a telecom brings radios. By 2024 municipalities were distributing thousands of Hyodol talking dolls to older adults living alone, instrumented for sentiment and escalation. Indigena Kamdori variant alerted a monitoring center after a 76-year-old told the robot she wanted to end her life, and responders reached an address that a spreadsheet would have missed. Hyodol's design arc, ChatGPT-powered dialogue by 2025 for free-form language, on-device defaults for privacy, and approximately 10,000 units in service through local programs, reads like a civic appliance roadmap rather than a gadget fad. What makes this credible is not the doll's eyes, it's the escalation tree, the night shift staffing at the call center, and the audit trail that says who listened, who called, and who knocked. Regulation, often accused of killing fun, mostly killed nonsense. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation since 2018 forced tabletop companions to stop, quiet recording, and publish data retention windows an adult could read. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Regime in the United States kept kids' toys from becoming networked confessional booths. The EU's Artificial Intelligence Act, finalized in 2024 and phasing in through the late 2020s, treats systems aimed at vulnerable groups as high risk, with mandatory risk management, human oversight, and transparency that the voice you hear is a machine. Japan pushed the operator side with ISO 31101 in 2023, a standard for safe service robot operation that makes risk assessment, training, and maintenance into verbs, and the US Food and Drug Administration reminded everyone that if you claim reduces anxiety, you are entering Class I territory with clinical data and labeling, as PORA already did. The melody is boring and therefore useful: consent, purpose limitation, conformity assessment, service operator obligations, and medical claims that rise or fall on evidence. The contrarian record keeps the field honest. By 2019 only around 10% of Japanese eldercare facilities had adopted any robot despite subsidies, and home care exposure hovered in the low single digits. Trials in European nursing homes around the mid-2000s teens found that Pepper could lead activities but struggled at long-term engagement without staff facilitation. Critics like Sherry Turkle have warned for years that the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship can dull our capacity for empathy if we do not design with truth in labeling. And the market delivered its own verdicts when SoftBank paused Pepper production in 2021, Jibwa closed in 2019, and several toy-grade, social runners spilled soup in restaurants where tile, mirrors, and patience are merciless quality assurance. None of this means robots fail at love. It means humans punish lies and incompetence and reward devices that buy back minutes, reduce friction, and behave like appliances with manners. Economics does not swoon, it audits. Programs that survive publish deltas, adherence to medications in percentage points after 90 days, minutes of purposeful interaction above baseline per day, caregiver steps avoided per shift, full alert false positive rates per 1,000 hours, and call center escalations per 100 devices per month. The billing codes follow the evidence. In elder programs, companion devices that drive measurable reductions in missed anticoagulants and emergency visits have a chance to be reimbursed adjacent to remote physiologic monitoring. In municipal deployments, budget lines that used to buy pamphlets now buy robots because a mayor can point to emergency call reductions and documented welfare checks. Engagement is never a vibe, it is, did the nightly round happen at 1900, and did the resident say they slept better after 21 days, with confidence intervals attached. Hardware sells once, companionship sells only if month 2 and month 3 feel calmer and more connected than month 1. The non-humanoid form factor keeps winning in kitchens and corridors because physics refuses to cosplay. A wheeled base the size of a nightstand that stops in 20 to 50 centimeters from half a meter per second under ISO 3691 to full style control is easier to love than a knee that misjudges wax tile, a mask that never rises above chest height avoids voyeurism by default, a telepresence camera pointed down a few degrees cannot pry into bedrooms unless a human tries, and a drawer weight manipulator with a 2-kilogram ceiling and compliant wrists will open pantries without chewing drywall. Toyota's human support robot prototypes from Nagoya and Hello Robot Stretch embody that, inside the fence, dexterity. Amazon's 2021 Astro, polarizing as it is, documented how conservative mapping, room locks, and speed caps translate into fewer broken vases and more security sweeps. The miracle is not legs. It is legible motion, refusal to surprise, and a geofence that enforces etiquette with centimeter honesty. Humanoids have their place when the geometry is stubbornly human. Bed transfers, sleeve threading, latch relatching, but the research pipeline is a slog of grams and milliseconds. Waseda University's ERIC, demonstrated in 2025 as a roughly 150-kilogram caregiver, could gently roll a bedridden person for a diaper change and assist with activities of daily living. The program's own timeline puts real service closer to 2030 because lift envelopes, force-sensing skins, and safety controllers must prove themselves in clinics where liability wears a tie. The plausible 10-year glide path is unromantic. Opt-in companions in eldercare become common by the mid-2030s, mostly on wheels. Europe's AI Act conformity assessments embed checklists into tenders. Japan and Korea push toward robots performing 20 to 30% of routine care hours by around 2040 because demographics do not blink, and the hardware in homes becomes modular. Soft wrists that cap at single-digit newtons, lift assists like ceiling hoists with smarter brains, and social masts that ask before they film. 50 years out, the speculative part is not sentience, it is etiquette shared between house, cart, occasional biped, and drone, printed in newtons, decibels, and centimeters instead of mood boards. Effective computing gets more useful when it drops the psychic act and marries more signals to better guardrails. Pepper's emotion engine classifies smiles and frowns and listens for vocal prosody. Newer stacks add watch-based heart rate, thermal hints of stress on a face, and gait change from a depth sensor down the hall. False positives are not a meme, they are the difference between a midnight welfare check and an embarrassed apology, so escalation grammar has to be printed. 1 Q means, ask a question, 2 Qs mean, call a family member, 3 Qs plus a key phrase mean, page the nurse. As language models rolled into companions, hired all shifting to a ChatGPT-based engine by 2025 for free-form responses, the safety story shifted to, local first defaults for sensitive rooms. Hard ceilings on creativity in clinical contexts, and a failsafe that falls back to templatized scripts for medication and crisis talk. The science is not guessing, it is detection thresholds, iterator reliability, and a routing tree you can audit. Governance in homes is architecture, not vibes. You start with opt-in and local-only defaults for any camera or microphone, with cloud used only for what the user signed in ink. You log, per household account, who accessed what and when, and you make deletion schedules and export functions that a person can use without a degree. Japan's METI guidelines for nursing care robots say, bluntly, tools within care, not replacements, and they imply training budgets and consent rituals as real line items. ISO 31101's operator-side risk management requires processes that survive turnover, and the EU AI Act's ban on manipulative techniques aimed at children or elders is a reminder that attention is not a pinata. The privacy officer and the liability insurer should be able to agree on the same sentence. If the device appears to surveil rather than support, it gets boxed and returned, and rightly so. The manufacturing and maintenance truths are the least romantic and the most decisive. If you cannot deliver a quiet drivetrain that stays under living room noise at 1 meter, brushes and bearings that survive a dozen quaternary ammonium wipe-downs a week, and batteries that do not puff when a charger lives behind a couch, you do not get to discuss companionship. If you cannot publish a stop distance certificate, 30 centimeters on dry tile at half a meter per second, creeping toward 60 when humidity spikes, and reproduce it with a tape measure, you do not get to live in a facility. If your firmware cannot keep an audit trail to millisecond precision and speak UL 3300's electrical hygiene without blushing, you do not get past the front desk. Service operators under ISO 31101 need training rosters, spare parts ledgers, and preventive maintenance calendars. Consumer programs need return boxes and on-site swap rituals that prevent goodwill from evaporating on day 61. None of this is transcendence, all of it is adult. The romance beat, Android faces, speculative weddings, pundits who promise legislation about human-robot marriage by 2050, remains mostly a press relations poem. The durable part is smaller and more beautiful, a dog-sized robot that turns loneliness into a morning routine in a queen's apartment, a plush doll in Dijon that caught a sentence before it turned into an obituary, a tabletop head in Marseille that persuades a man to take a short walk because the weather is good and his legs will forgive him. We will argue about metaphysics for the rest of the century. In the meantime, the engineering test is public and quantifiable. Do minutes get kinder? Do rooms get safer? And do caregivers, paid and unpaid, get to go home with a little more attention left in their pockets? The machines that pass that test will not feel like invaders, they will feel like appliances that finally learned bedside manners, which is to say they will feel like neighbors. The punchline is not love from circuits, it is choreography between humans and small, polite machines that know when to be quiet, when to be helpful, and when to roll away.